everyone, and welcome to the Takarazuka Review Fan Podcast, the podcast where fans from around the world get together to talk about Takarazuka. And today we have Jen in New York,
Becca in California,
and Julie in Arizona.
Yay! And we've just gotten over some frustrating technical difficulties, which I'm sure everybody is used to in their lives right now. But let's talk about some happy things before we get started on anything else, because I know everybody needs a few more happy things in their lives right now. Becca, you want to start us off?
Sure. So mine is completely not Takarazuka related. About 2 weeks ago, my longtime boyfriend and I, Patrick, got engaged.
Yay! Congratulations.
Thank you. So I've been telling everyone that no, this is not recent events inspired. This is something that, we've been planning on for quite a while, but the ring happened to come in, and so it's funny because on one hand, I'm really, I'm excited and people have given me a lot of congratulations. On the other hand, I can't really plan right now, but I have a ring now, and that's pretty cool.
Nice.
That is so cool. I don't think I've seen the ring, Becca. We have to, if you don't mind sharing a picture, maybe we can put it in with the podcast.
Didn't you put something on Twitter or Instagram or something?
I did, but I can share it if people want to see. If people want to see my ring.
I think it's always fun to show it off. Awesome, Becca. Congratulations. That's awesome news. How about you, Julie?
So in Takarazuka, sort of news but not new news. Sky Stage has been airing like all the top Musumeyaku music salons for the past 20 years. On Sky Stage. So I have a friend who hooks me up with Sky Stage stuff, and I've been getting all of the Musumeyaku music salons, and I'm eagerly awaiting watching them.
Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Especially because I don't think, even when they were still releasing things on VHS, like things for Sanbante and lower, the
Musumeyaku stuff wasn't high priority. No. And on top of that, the one who is not a top Musumeyaku, Miho Keiko's music salon from last year also aired, and she had Soragumi backup singers, so that'll be fun too.
Oh, very cool. I'll be looking forward to your thoughts about it as you're watching them. Very cool. So my happy thing is a little strange. It's kind of general. It just, I've been following OG Twitter accounts for a while, and it's funny how a lot of them are picking up who didn't post as much anymore. But the one that surprisingly has been super cute has been conductor Nishino Jun.
Oh,
nice.
His Twitter account has a lot of he'll post things his son has drawn, and just cute little anpanman, and his family did hanami the other day, and they did it in a car. They just drove down a road that had some cherry blossom trees over it. So he was like, "This is how you do hanami." It was really cute.
Oh, I think you retweeted that too, didn't you?
Yeah, it was cute.
Yeah.
So that's been making me very happy lately. Today's episode is actually going to be about Casablanca, which was a Soragumi, a Cosmos Troupe show from 2010, which I can't believe it was 10 years ago.
It was
now.
2009 to 2010. It was November and December 2009 in Grand Theater, and then the beginning of the year in 2010 in Tokyo.
Yeah, and it closed the end of February, I think. So that's almost exactly 10 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. So we were going to talk about the movie a little bit, the classic movie that came out in 1942, and then talk about Casablanca. But before we do, we wanted to put a couple of warnings up for people. Number one, that we're going to have some spoilers, because we're going to talk about plot points. And there's also some things in the musical and just in the movie itself that might... that we thought we should put trigger warnings up for, which is there is a character in blackface. There are a lot of Nazis in the movie, and there is a character who has some extra padding on. that we're going to talk about a little bit. So if weight is kind of something that you're sensitive to, that might be something to look out for too. But back into happy things, let's talk about the movie, because Becca just watched it recently.
And I have
so
not watched it in 10 years. So yeah.
Oh, yeah, so let's talk about it. So Becca, what would you say, like, for somebody who's listening to this who has no idea what Casablanca is about, how would you describe the movie?
I'm trying to think of how to start that, because it's such a
It's a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
The first thing that so I rewatched it actually on Valentine's Day. A local cinema was doing a screening of it that me and my now fiance went to.
That's so cute.
Yeah, so I would say it's a romance, but it's also in some ways like a thriller, a little bit, in the intrigue that's going on. It's also a little bit, I think, like Hamlet, in that they talk about, how Hamlet from the beginning has all the information that he needs to do something, and he does not. And very similarly, Rick from very early on in the movie has what he needs to help Victor Laszlo, but it takes him until the end to do action.
Don't you think that also it's like sort of propaganda? Like at the time, the Americans had not, there was a lot of hesitancy from the American side to join World War II because it wasn't affecting America directly.
Right, so that's thanks for reminding me of that, Julie. So keep in mind, I forget, this came out in 1940, what?
42. It actually came out, they sped up the release a little bit to coincide with the invasion, the Allied invasion at Casablanca.
I didn't realize that part. But also, I think I've heard that a lot of not a lot, but at least a few of the actors in the movie were actually refugees from different parts of Europe and other places.
Yeah, somebody told me actually that, like, if all the actors in the movie had like name credits, which they don't, but if they all did, somebody went through and counted, and only 4 of the cast members were born in America.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So
I'm sure Ingrid Bergman wasn't.
Yeah, so they were talking about how, like, you usually don't get genuine accents like that in Hollywood movies in the 40s, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Another thing that really struck me about it is that this movie is coming up on 100 years old, and the dialogue is really, really sharp and really funny. That like just the zingers still really hit.
Yes, agreed. It's funny. I was telling you two earlier, but just so our listeners know, I bought it off of iTunes yesterday because I thought I had it on DVD, but I couldn't find it anywhere. And if you buy it off of iTunes, it comes with like 4 or 5 hours of just like extras of like background info and like making ofs and things like that. And it was pretty interesting. I learned some stuff that either I had forgotten or I had never learned before. So the movie is actually based on a play.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, that was never produced. But the guy who wrote the play, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, had actually been over to visit his wife's family in Vienna in 1938. So the original play kind of takes place in a cafe in Vienna, but it's very similar in that he was trying to write something that would kind of wake Americans up because he was already starting to see what was happening, across Europe in the late 30s. So I think you're spot on, Julie, when we talk about how much of a propaganda movie it was. And I guess apparently Warner Brothers that made the movie was like one of the first movie companies that was actually actively kind of speaking out against the Nazis. Like as early as 1936.
Oh wow!
The head of Warner gave a speech against the Nazis, and I guess the FBI put him on a left-leaning suspicious list because he was so anti-Nazi. So it's thinking of it in that way, it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to harp on it too much, but like from an American perspective, it's easy now to, all of the movies that Hollywood makes about Americans being these big heroes of World War II, but we were hedging our bets for a long time and not joining the war. And it was really, I mean, I'm sure Europeans know this, but it was much more Europe and Britain being involved in the war than America was for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm going to take this as a segue, unless we wanted to add anything else about the movie, because I know, Becca, you said you wanted to talk about the Marseille song scene. And
oh yeah.
When I was watching the making of on the movie, they were saying like a lot of the extras, like we said, they were foreign born. A lot of them were actually refugees from Europe, and they said on the day that they were filming, like all the extras were actually like in tears. Like one of the reasons I mean, it's hard to say why that scene is so moving, but it's probably because a lot of the people there really, really understood the feelings of what was going on in that scene. So, did you want to talk about that scene a little bit, Becca?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to just give kind of a fun fact about that scene. There's a minor character named Yvonne, who starts off as Rick's kind of fling of the moment, and then we see her later come back in with a Nazi officer on her arm. But then after this song in which Victor Laszlo rouses the cafe guests to sing the French national anthem over the Nazi war songs, Yvonne just starts crying and yelling, Vive la France, Vive la France. And that, I believe, was not an ad-lib, but that was the actress's genuine reaction.
Yeah.
Nice.
Also, so one of my favorite things, or my favorite facts about this is, so at the time, they could not actually get the rights to use the German national anthem, because if they did, they would have to pay royalties to the German government.
Yuck.
So I think the song that the Germans are singing is actually like an old World War I song, and so the idea being that the Nazis are actually sitting around and reminiscing about about the old days.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but so, talk about a moment that was perfectly set up to transition from a movie into a musical number. Because
it's already a musical number.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say one of my favorite things, I think, about the Takarazuka musical, especially, I don't know if it happens as much in Act 2, but in Act 1, where they've got all the scenes at Rick's Cafe, and then the other scenes at, I don't know, you can't really call it a cafe, the place he had in France, the Can show place.
La Belle Aurore.
Yeah. Like, there are so many, I don't want to call them minor characters. A lot of them were upperclassmen, but they weren't, like, star-tracked people that had, like, little musical numbers throughout Act 1. That doesn't always happen in Takarazuka shows.
It's very true.
And I thought that was really, really cool how they did that.
Do we want to back up a second and just talk about the basics for anyone who has never seen the classic movie Casablanca and or never seen the Takarazuka version?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, the basic story of Casablanca is in Morocco, which was like a French territory at the time. In the city of Casablanca, Paris has been occupied by the Nazis, and by extension, their territories are being controlled by the Vichy, and a lot of European people are fleeing Europe to flee the Nazis and kind of routing through Casablanca in order to flee to America, which, is the land of the free and all that. And basically a very well-known freedom fighter, Victor Laszlo, is also passing through Casablanca, and it crosses paths with Rick Blaine, the owner of this cafe bar casino thing in Casablanca, and it just so happens that they both love the same woman, and so it's sort of a love story, sort of a political story, sort of intrigue, like Becca was saying, because there's this whole plot of illegal exit papers that people can either illegally get exit papers or illegally obtain them in order to leave Casablanca and go through neutral territories to get out of Europe. And so the whole plot revolves around who has the exit papers and how can they get out of the country and who's going to leave and who's plotting against who and all that stuff.
And I think we should mention, you said the Vichy, but the French government that was in charge of Casablanca was actually collaborating with the Nazis. It was not the Free French. It was
Right.
occupied French.
Right,
Yeah.
the occupied France.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard it, like, the movie referred to as, it's a romance story that's not a romance story. It's an action movie that's not an action movie. Like, there's a lot of layers to it.
Very true. It's definitely not an action movie in the way that, like, North by Northwest is an action movie, you know?
Right. So now that we've got a little bit more of the basics, thank you, Julie. What would you say, kind of transitioning a little bit into the musical, is there like a moment or a scene or a part of it that you really loved?
I really just liked, in general, the set cleverness, because a lot of it does revolve around Rick's Café Americain and the backside of the cafe, which is a casino, gambling tables. And this, they utilize the rotating stage quite a bit to have the front part of the cafe and the back part of the gambling hall. Like, within one scene, there's a bit towards the beginning where there's like a German banker guy, and he's like, I know there's gambling tables back there, let me in, I have money. And Rick he is like, no, screw you, showing that he's sort of a good guy because he doesn't truck with those Germans. And like, they show the cafe part, they rotate to show the gambling part, and then they rotate back, or they rotate all the way around rather, to see that cafe again, basically all in kind of the same scene. And it's really a good show, like you were saying, Jen, to have a lot of little parts where, like, the guy who gets the German banker guy who's complaining, or the snitch who's always trying to rat out the freedom fighters. There's all these little characters that give the up-and-comers and the upperclassmen a lot to play with. And obviously you couldn't appreciate this now, but seeing it live as I did 9 or 10 times, I spent a lot of time watching the background people, to be honest.
Yeah. I feel like that's awesome, Julie, because I was going to bring that up too, and I'd forgotten. The way that they use the rotating scenes, I feel like not as many Takarazuka directors do that anymore. It was cool. And I'm wondering, I feel like, I can't even remember who the director was. Was this Koike?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was Koike.
I feel like this was really an homage to the movie, because
it was.
The director of the movie also uses, like, the movement of his cameras is very, like, it can be sweeping. There's a lot of tight close-ups, but there's a lot of that kind of, he shows the action by, like, moving the cameras with the people. And I feel like by using the rotating stage, they caught a lot of that part of the movie, which I thought was really, really kind of cool too.
Yeah. It's hard because it's two totally different mediums, but I do feel like it was very much Koike's love letter to the movie. I was rereading my notes from at the time, which was fun, watching it fresh, because we just rewatched it yesterday, but also reading my notes from 10 years ago. And I had, like, watched the movie a week before watching the play, and despite them being two different mediums, it really was like Koike was trying to capture those exact scenes and the way they were posed and what they were wearing, and, like, all of it was really trying to recreate the feel of the movie.
Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. I can't remember if it was before we started recording, but and I know, Becca, you brought this up too, like the dialogue in the movie, especially the parts that the Epstein brothers wrote, is hilarious. And there's just so many, like, because Rick, the main character played by Ozora Yuhi, is just, his character is very dry, and, like, he's always, like, walking the line between being an outright opposition to the Nazis and, like, being very careful because he's running a cafe in their territory, and he's also walking the line between being this, like, disillusioned, burnt out kind of cynic and, like, the actual humanitarian that we know he is. So it's pretty funny. I think some of my favorite parts of the play were actually hearing how they chose to translate those lines into Japanese.
Yes.
Because so much of the dialogue from the musical is right out of the movie. And it's just amazing. Like, this is where I get into the spoiler alert, but towards the very end, when Nono Sumika's character comes in, and she's trying to get those letters of transit, those traveling papers, and she's started to get desperate, and she, like, right before she pulls a gun on Rick, I think it is, or no, maybe it's after, she's like, if you don't give us those letters that we need, you know, Victor Laszlo, her husband's gonna die here in Casablanca, and you know, and Rick's reply is, well, I'm gonna die here too. It's a good place to die.
Yeah.
Is what he says, basically.
And he says the exact line.
Yeah, and it's great in the movie, and it's great here in the musical. Like, it's like another level of drama that I feel like Takarazuka gets kind of schmoopy a lot.
Oh, yeah.
They become so melodramatic that it's just, like, over the top. And I feel like they did a great job here kind of keeping... I mean, of course, it's going to be a little bit over the top.
Yeah, there are still some parts where it's, like, melodramatic, like, especially with Yuhi and Sumika pining over each other, and, like, you know, Rick gets really heavy in the bottle and, you know, stares moodily into her glass, which is Yuhi's forte, of course.
But that's in the movie, too.
No, but what I was going to say is then, and also, like, you know, Sumika, like, in the flashback, where she finds out that her husband is alive, Victor Laszlo, and she, like, cries and throws herself on the couch, and, you know, like, there is a little bit of...
Of course.
Well, so I do remember reading in interviews at the time, so the way you translate Here's Looking at You, Kid, is Kimi no Hitomi ni Kanpai, which is, how would you literally translate that?
A toast to your eyes.
Yeah, which is, you know, generally the same thing, but I remember hearing stories about the first time it was said in the rehearsal room, like, everybody just, like, kind of burst out laughing because even in Japan, it's one of those really well-known lines. And I remember hearing about how they had to kind of work to make those scenes serious so that, you know, the audience wasn't going to just start cracking up when...
It's tough when something's so well-known and so many lines from Casablanca of all the gin joints in all the world, you know...
she walks into mine.
Right. Like, there's so many lines that, like, you've heard a zillion times, even if you haven't seen the movie. So I get what you mean. And actually, there were quite a few parodies, I think, of, like I said, I was reading my notes of the time. There was, like, a year-end special where they dressed up as their characters, or dressed up as characters from... Casablanca, and they did, like, bowling or something, some soragumi, upperclassmen and underclassmen. And a girl that I really like, Monchi, who retired recently, she was very, very kin 2 or 3 baby back then. She said something like, "Here's bowling at you, kid," you know, or like, it was here's striking at you, kid, I think it was. You know, just ridiculousness. So I think behind the scenes, I'm sure the actresses were having a real good time making puns and making jokes.
Yeah. And, you know, like, we're so used to hearing that line because, like you said, it's quoted so often. But if you think about it, even in English, it's like, what does that mean?
What does that even mean? Yeah.
And apparently it's the legend is that wasn't even in the script. That was apparently, like... Bogart was teaching Ingrid Bergman how to play poker. And I guess, I don't know if it's a poker term or if it was something, like, apparently he was saying that as he was, like, teaching her poker, and then it came up and they started putting it into the movie.
No kidding.
So I thought that was kind of funny. I've got to look up the origins of that phrase.
That's
I'm
nuts.
Like, it's pretty funny.
No kidding. Yeah, it's funny because I did kind of get caught up in the schmaltz a little bit rewatching it, you know, and I was like, "Ooh, if Yuhi was gazing at me across the table like that, I think my heart would flutter a little bit too," you know, even though the line, you know, is cheesy, and it's like, what does that really mean? A toast to your gaze, toast to your eyes. But yeah, at the same time, it's romantic.
Speaking of that, like, I feel like they cast this show, like, I could see why they did this show with the Sorogumi of, like, 2009, 2010, because the actresses fit their parts. Like, it was amazing.
I should note, this was Yuhi and Sumika's Ohiro Mikoan, so it was their debut as top stars in the Grand Theater.
Yeah. So what do you guys think about how well the actresses kind of fit the roles that they were cast in? And not just, I'm thinking about all the smaller parts too, not just like
Yeah, like I
the main
said,
characters.
Yuhi brooding is a forte of hers. Like, it made me think of The Last Party, which Tsukigumi
Yes.
redid recently, but they did it originally in 2004, with Yuhi in the lead. She plays,
And Tani too.
yeah, and Tani, actually. They did both of them twice, 2004
Yes.
and 2006 as a sidebar. Anyway, she's very good at that. I think Meet-chan is really good at the jokey but also kind of serious, kind of a slime ball but kind of a slime ball with a heart of gold, like
Yeah.
that. And I was, like I said, reading my notes from the time, I really liked Tamatama, Amo Tamaki, who plays Ugarte,
Yes.
who
Yes,
is,
it's like Peter Lorre's character, and
yeah,
it's for
it was
perfect
like she
somehow.
came right out of the movie, was my
Yeah.
notes at the time. I was so impressed by the way she styled her hair, the way she talked, like everything
Yeah.
was like she really was trying to capture that guy.
Yes.
And then sadly Ugarte dies really quickly in the movie because he's the carrier of the, letters of transit, the MacGuffin of the movie. And they know that he's carrying them, so they arrest him, and he gets killed or something like that. But she shows up again
Yeah.
later to do like a solo in the bazaar scene.
Yeah, I thought that was her. She was the merchant, right? One of the merchants. Okay.
Is it okay if I talk a little bit more about Michan's character
Please.
and her role?
Yes, please do.
So I think she talked about during the performance, and afterwards, that this was a really hard role for her, that she wasn't expecting for this to be how she was cast, and that Koike was essentially really, really, really hard on her,
Yeah.
and that it was just so tough for her to do, and that she felt like eventually she got it, but just that it was a huge strain.
Koike Sensei has a reputation for having very exacting standards, and
Yeah.
expecting a lot of people, yelling at them when they don't do things like he wants them to. So yeah, I got the impression from you and from interviews from Ochakai and stuff that he was pretty hard on her.
Now this was when Michan was she officially Sanbante?
She had been Sanbante with Tani, and Tomu and Michan both continued their Nibante Sanbante pattern with Yuhi until Michan transferred out and Tomu transferred out as well.
Yeah, and Tomu transferred out, then Michan.
Oh, you're right.
I do want to come back to her character in a minute, but I do want to say, like, I also was surprised because we've had so many young top stars lately, I feel like, and at the time of this show, like, Yuhi was what, Ken 16?
Oh my gosh.
No, 18. Something crazy,
really
right?
high, like 17 or 18, yeah.
And Tomu was also, I mean, because she debuted in 96, right? So she was also like Ken 14 or 15.
Yeah, and her peers, like, Chia was already top at this time, who was much younger.
Yeah, and I mean, and Michan was young, but she was still like Ken 12 or 13, which is like the age of a lot of our top stars right now.
Kimu, who is Michan's classmate, became top the next year.
Yeah, so it's interesting watching this too from the point of view of, like, I feel like technically they were very comfortable with themselves, the otokoyaku especially, who were in the lead roles, because we don't get that as much anymore. But it fit kind of with that like 40s nostalgia movie kind of a thing.
Without going on too much of a tangent, Soragumi has always been this troupe of late bloomers, and I don't want to say they're actually late bloomers. I feel like Hankyu doesn't give them a chance faster than their counterparts in other troupes. See also, Rei and Koto are already top stars. Meanwhile, Zun is just barely became Sanbante in Soragumi.
But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the first two, or three, I should say, top stars of Soragumi stuck around a long time. So there was kind of a bottleneck there for a long time.
There was. But like, there's been so many transfers in and out that I don't see why they couldn't have cut up, so to speak. But yeah, so in the time of Casablanca, they were quite older compared to the lineups of other troupes, where, like I said, at the same time, Chie and Kaname were top and Nibante and Hoshigumi, who are both
That's right.
younger than Meek-chan as far as
Right.
Ken. So like, yeah,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
it was mature, let's say, a much more
Yeah.
mature cast than what they had in other troops at the same time.
Yeah. But then let's come back to Michan because
Yes.
I did want to talk a little bit about, like you said, it was a really tough role for her, but it was also a huge controversy, kind of the things that they chose, how they chose to portray her character, who was the chief of police of the French, the Vichy government. So she was kind of in control of, so she was kind of the villain, but not really. But do you want to speak a little bit more about that, Becca?
Sure. I mean, she is her character, Louis, is a openly corrupt French official who would take money in order to process exit papers. Also, was pretty openly collaborating with the Vichy government and with the Nazis, and positions herself throughout the story as looking out for herself and how, you know, she can play both sides against the middle until, spoiler alert, the very, very, very end, in which Michan's character chooses to help Rick rather than report him to the Nazi government. So it's a nice little redemption story.
Yeah.
But then, so it's funny, we just talked about how it was a mature cast, but Michan was actually very young for her Ken. Like, she started like the day after she was eligible to like be in TMS. I mean, not literally the day, but you know, she has a March birthday, and she, I think, entered right after she finished middle school. So just physically, she was very young at the time, and in order to make her look a little older, they had her wear some extra padding designed to make her look heavier.
And actually, I should side note that the Kumicho, Sushi-san, and also the Senka guest, Asano Chihiro, also wore padding.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it's just my opinion, but it serves no particular purpose. Like, especially for Senka, you don't have to make them look older. They look older. Like, you know, I think, honestly, that it goes back to Koike having this vision of what he wanted it to look like and trying to make it very much like the movie. And if he wanted like this heavy set guy to play Signor Ferrari or whatever, he had even the Senka member wearing extra padding, which I don't think was necessary.
And I think it was a big controversy among the fans, not to make us sound shallow, even though, you know, the beauty of Takarazuka is one of the things that appeals to everybody.
That's literally their main appeal, is the Otokoyaku no Bigaku, you know, the beauty of Otokoyaku.
Very outraged. I feel like a lot of Michan fans or just fans in general, they were like, this is a Star Trek young star. Like, what are you doing, Koike?
And I was making the comment to my friend yesterday when we were watching this that, like, I kept thinking about Me and My Girl and Sir John, who is always played by the Nibante Otokoyaku and is an elderly man who has back problems and, like, you know, his hair is graying and wears a mustache depending on how the Nibante Otokoyaku chooses to portray it. But they never made that Otokoyaku wear extra padding. They would never dream of doing that. So it doesn't super make sense to me.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that wearing extra padding makes somebody less attractive at all. It's just so, it stands out so much because these are all dancers.
Yeah.
You know? So even a little bit of padding on a stage setting has a huge influence. And I think it's weird too, because if you look at Claude Rains in the movie, he's a pretty svelte guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
It was an interesting choice. But I feel like Michan got the character down so well, like the personality of somebody who is like, you should be disgusted by this guy because he's actually like trading sexual favors with like married women to get them the passes to get them out of the country, but at the same time you're charmed by him for some strange reason.
Yeah.
Like, it's like it's a lot. Yeah
I had, as you were talking, I like had a thought that went in one side of my brain and out the other. I can't remember what it was. But there's all these little side characters that we were talking about before that are like right out of the movie. I don't know if anybody wanted to talk about Sam or Bansan. It was her last show and all that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Alice first?
Well, I mean,
I feel like we should.
So,
Yes.
Of course, from stepping back for the movie, really the whole purpose of Nagina Rumi and Hanakage Adisu's characters is to show that deep down Rick really is a good guy,
Yeah.
and that Renault is the bad guy, because Adis-chan and Kacha are this young Bulgarian couple who, like many others, fled their home country and are trying to get out. And they don't have enough money to get exit papers. And Kacha has been trying to play the gambling tables in order to raise up enough money to get out of the country, but they don't have enough. So there's a point at which they're waiting outside to have like an interview with Captain Renault, Meat-chan's character, and he says, "Only send the women in," and it's like gross, And then later, Adis-chan's character, Amina, has this conversation with Yuhi, Rick, where they talk around it without exactly saying, Renault said, like you said, Jen, that he would trade sexual favors with me in order to give me exit papers. She says, like, if someone loved you very much and they did a bad thing, but it was to save your life, or, it was for the greater good of, blah, 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 would you forgive them? And so what they're talking about, but they don't exactly say.
And it's interesting because that's what happens in the movie too. And I read that they had to do that because the Hollywood censorship.
Oh, I'm sure. At the time. I'm sure what was it called? The Hays Code.
Yeah, they were just writing that line with this movie in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there's nothing like what we see in movies today. But so, other than the actual plot bit, Adis-chan and Kacha have a really great bit in the beginning where they sing second song of the musical about getting visas to get out of the country, and then right after that, a hopeful song about flying on the wings of an airplane to freedom. And it's a really pretty song. And I remember at the time, people talked a lot about the choral power of origami because there are a lot of big group numbers in the musical. And you can really feel all those beautiful harmonies and those big choir numbers show off the musical range of the troupe.
Yeah. I have one nitpicky question, and you might actually know the answer to this, Julie, because I don't know. What is with Alice's first dress?
They don't pick their costumes. I don't really to be honest, I don't love Sumika's weird satin peach dress at the beginning either. That third dress, I don't know which one it is. The white one with the black detailing.
Trim,
I like that one, but I don't I'm sure they're trying to be representative of the 40s or whatever, but I don't know. They don't pick their costumes.
Isn't there one of Alice's dresses was like a leftover from Ohana from one of her shows, or am I mixing this up with something else?
I think the gray dress that she wears in the second act is a dress that Masami wore in Paradise Prince or Never Sleep or something. And that Adis-chan's finale costume was a pair dance costume of Ohana's.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's fun Musumeyaku facts when you go to a bunch of Musumeyaku ochakais is they'll often tell you such and such dress was previously worn by such. What I learned is that they have a little tag inside the dress that says who's worn it before.
Oh, that's cool. I wonder if they do that with all the costumes, the Otokoyaku suits too.
It's a good question because we've all watched plenty of Takarazuka shows. We know how many times they reuse costumes.
Right.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I'm not sure if we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but grand theater shows, at least in the main roles, I think they're almost all new costumes. It's pretty rare for something to be reused, but in smaller theater
All the
shows,
time.
it's almost all the time they're reusing costumes, and I assume that's just a budget thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, you know,
I mean, you spend all that money to make them, you might as well get more than one use out of them.
It would be a waste if you only had people wear them for 3 months and then never used them again.
Yeah.
And you're also doing so many shows that are about World War II, so many shows that are set in the 40s, like you may as well use those period costumes.
Right. Although I do have to slightly disagree with you on one thing, though, Julie.
Yes.
I actually really loved all of Nono Sumika's costumes in this show. I was actually going to say, I thought they were really actually kind of cool.
I like that red dress in the flashback and the white dress.
I like the outfit. Was it the white one that she wore with the shawl over her hair? Or was that a different costume? I can't even remember. I really liked that one, too. That was like when she first saw Sam, I think, and Rick in the cafe. It's
when she comes back later that night.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
that's
what kicks off the big flashback or whatever.
Right.
Or no, is it at the end? It's like at the end of the first act, after Rick has had a half-hour flashback. The entire, like literally half of the first act is just one extended flashback. And
well, you got to get that love story.
You gotta.
The continuity's not there, so.
So, at the very end, after Rick has had this huge flashback, Ilsa comes in and she wants to explain, what happened back then, because she just ditched him. And she's wearing the headscarf, like you're saying, and it's very evocative of the movie. I don't remember if it's peach or pink or some. I just remember the headscarf. Like, I don't remember the dress.
White or blue, yeah. Actually, talking about the flashback, because one thing I did want to talk about was that can scene, because I know I mentioned it when we were texting, and you guys, thank you for looking up the choreographer for me, because when in the flashback, Rick had a cafe in France somewhere, and well, it's a cafe in the movie. In the Takarazuka, they've turned it into like a can dance hall.
Yeah.
But there's this cool. Yes, there's this really cool like can number that is very different from, I feel like, regular Takarazuka can, because Takarazuka can has become kind of like it's stylized. It's not like a real can, and this one was a lot more of like a real can. Like the outfits were more real and how they used them was more real. And so I was like, well, which of the 3 choreographers for this show did that scene? And 2 of the choreographers were actually former Takarazuka, but it turns out the third one, who was, it's Sakuragi Ryosuke, right? Is the one who actually choreographed that scene. And I feel like that makes a lot more sense. And this is me getting on my soapbox, but like as much as I love former Takarazuka becoming choreographers, I do think it's good when they pull in outside choreographers too, because it's like an like a breath of fresh air sometimes.
I honestly think that's good with anything, not just choreographers, but like when they bring in, like with Flying Sappa, they have a composer writing the music, and anytime they bring in like a fresh perspective like that, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah.
When they have,
but I liked it.
Yeah.
Like usually those can dances, I'm like, oh god,
it's just yet another Rockette. It's just a remixed Rockette. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. It was different.
High energy.
I'm trying to think of other shows, and I'm sure there must be a few in which there is a can or Rockette-esque number as part of the plot, as opposed to in the finale.
Yeah.
Well, can.
The literal musical can. I've never watched that actually.
I don't think I've seen it either, but I know there is one in there. There've
96.
been a couple. Like, usually when there's a scene in Paris, like in the...
They do it a lot.
Yeah. I'm wondering about the new Moon Troop show.
Because it's the same era.
Moulin Rouge-esque.
I mean, not the same era. Yeah.
Yeah.
The era of the Moulin Rouge.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious to see. I bet there'll be a can in that one.
Yeah. I keep thinking that there was something I wanted to bring up. Oh, we were talking about I did want to mention the Nazis, even though just partly as like a sort of warning, like we were saying, there is quite a lot of Nazi saluting and saying Heil Hitler and stuff, that we noted that there's another show set in Nazi Germany a couple years ago, the Berlin Hoshigumi one, Berlin My Love, or they retranslated it to the Cinema Rhapsody or whatever. And my friend had watched it, and she said they didn't say the word as much, you know? At least they didn't, like, do the salute as much and say the words as much. And it's like, we get it, they're Nazis, you know? You can express that they're Nazis without have them do so much Nazi stuff. Yeah. So it definitely is uncomfortable making. And Bon Akira and Omi Ako have quite dark blackface, which is never my favorite. And, you know, I wish they could just do it another way. I wish they could just express people from different cultures and different countries in a way that isn't offensive.
Well, and you see in a lot of other shows, like I'm thinking My Dear New Orleans, or Never Sleep is another one.
It's more like lightly toasty. Not quite so dark.
There's a little bit of darker makeup, but it's not blackface.
It's not so... Which is really like... It's sort of like... Aren't they both bad? You know, like, does it really matter what degree to
then
it?
You don't want to start... Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, going back to the Nazis for a minute, because it did hit me in that show, like, because I like Yumi Hiro a lot, and there was the one number that they have, like, towards the middle or the end of the second act, I think, because they don't have that many numbers, but they do have that one, and, like, it ends with them, like, doing the Nazi salute, and then the audience applauds because they just finished a number.
Right.
Thinking, what? No. Yeah, that's very uncomfortable. It's
pretty uncomfortable. Yeah.
And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started recording. Like, the blackface, like, it's interesting to me because I go back and reread the stuff I wrote in reviews from, like, 10 or 15 years ago, and I feel like, I don't know if it was because I was younger or just because people weren't so aware, I think, of things like that. I mean, it didn't strike me the way it did going back and rewatching shows now, and it makes me sad because this was Bon Akira's final show, right? And the character of Sam is such a big one in the movie, and he's Sam's best friend, which is like
Rick's best friend.
Have a relationship like that, or Rick, sorry.
Yes.
To have a relationship like that, like in the 1940s, was something special that you didn't really get in a Hollywood screen very often. And so it's really important that character is who he is, but it is, you know, it's like, so then how do you portray that and be fair to the character? Like, because you don't want them to suddenly make this character white.
Yeah,
you know?
But the thing is, I think that, like, that is... I get what you're saying, and it definitely was significant at the time. But because it's so far removed from that, the movie was made in the 40s and the play was made in 2009, I feel like... And America is so much of an integrated country in the way that Japan is like 98% Japanese people. It just... It's never really going to come across the same way of how important that is, unless they really, like, hammer it into the dialogue and be like, look how great it is that these two people are friends, you know, like, and then it would be tedious. And
you know, Julie, I'm gonna disagree though, in that I feel like there have been Takarazuka shows who, you know, maybe successfully, maybe not, that have, you know, touched on characters who are of a different race, and that makes a difference to their story. But without having to, like, do such heavy makeup. I mean, I feel like there was a way to give a nod to it without... I mean, I feel like there have been other shows...
Oh, no, I agree with you.
I don't know if they did it well, but did anyone see the Abraham Lincoln show with Todoroki?
No, I have not. No. I'm afraid.
As am I a bit. So, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, that Japanese people might not get the difference as much without... But
I guess what I was just trying to say is, in this show specifically, it's not the focus of the story. It's just a part of the story.
But see, this is where race is such a a hard thing to talk about and to portray, because until Takarazuka starts having people of color as Takarazuka, this is never going to be a problem that goes away. And then what do? Do you completely not represent a whole segment of the world's population? Do they just disappear? Because, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know
and it's like
what
you
the
can't,
answer is.
I don't remember if I was rereading my old journal or, like, where this came up, but, like, for example, West Side Story, it's the whole freaking point of the story is about, like, turf wars between gangs of, Puerto Ricans and white kids. And they've done West Side Story in Japan in a non-Takarazuka setting. Like, and I'm sure they just do something else, like dress them in certain costumes and whatever.
Right.
I know for a fact that when Ma-kun did Sister Act, they did have the actresses put on a little bit of darker makeup. Not to the degree that I feel like Bonsan did in Casablanca, but even outside of Takarazuka, I guess what I'm saying is, even outside of Takarazuka, they're not immune to it. And people still do, Japanese actresses still do blackface in order to portray, I am playing a person of color, or, not a person of color, they are people of color. But
And again, this is 3 white ladies talking about this, so, but it is... I do think also we got to be careful about saying, well, and not that you're saying it's okay because it's lighter. I understand that. But, like, I've taken so many classes in, like, culturally responsive education. And, like, that's such a thing that we're trying to become more aware and better at, of, like, understanding cultural differences. And I do remember, like, so many documentaries and, like, shows that I watched where so many people talk about the idea of beauty in the Black community and how skin tone is seen and portrayed, and we got to be careful that we're not saying, oh, if it's lighter it's better.
No, you're right.
And it's such a tough thing to talk about and to figure out, and I'm sure in Takarazuka they might be having these conversations too, and I mean, it's interesting to wonder like, what's going on their side of the aisle. Well, the answer is clear. They just have to have some some new Takarazuka.
I wish.
Yeah,
it'd be amazing.
It could come.
Someday.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about some other characters, because I know we haven't talked about everybody.
Can we talk about Toki Irisu?
Yes.
Yeah.
So she has 2 characters. One is, oh my god, what's the name of her character in the flashback?
Cesar or Cesare or something like that. Yeah.
So she has one character, which is this kind of very sexy, brooding
eye patch guy.
Eye patch guy who comes to talk with Rick about the upcoming conflict that will be starting. But that's a good, sexy character. But her other character, which I adore, is Mr. Curtis, who is the American tourist who gets pickpocketed a few times. And just, so one of the things I love about Toki Irisu is she's just, Julie, how would you describe her personality?
A big, lovable dork.
Yeah,
big, tall, and dumb.
And that, yes, I mean, not that she's really
not
dumb.
Really dumb, but, like, she's good at playing those kinds of characters.
Yes, and so just getting her to play this kind of clueless tourist, I used to love watching her.
It was so fun.
And Cesaro is actually one of because there's not that much, I mean, they did add a lot of material, but they didn't add that many new characters, but Cesaro was one who wasn't in the movie at all. That was a
completely new character, where, rewatching it was like a flashback within a flashback, where Rick has this huge flashback about how he met Ilsa and Sam, and within that, he's remembering his old gun running days when he was like a freedom fighter with the Spanish Civil War and something about Ethiopia and other places where he was like helping, always fighting for the underdog. And then he wakes up with a start and they're like, oh, you were dreaming within the flashback. And then he and Rick and Ilsa sing this love song about we won't ask each other about each other's pasts. Well,
Wait, but doesn't he actually run into Cesaro at some point, or am I completely?
Yeah. It's like he approaches in that first scene where Rick and Ilsa meet.
It's when the Nazis are coming into Paris.
Yeah.
Isn't he trying to get Rick to help fight?
Yeah,
against the occupation of Paris.
Right.
Yeah.
But then that sometime later, there's like that whole gun dance where
That's right.
Yuhi has this dream about remembering that, like, I tried to be a freedom fighter and then everyone died, everything went wrong, and that's why I gave up on my freedom fighter days.
I always thought that was like the end of the Paris scene where all those people were killed when the Nazis invaded Paris, and so that was what like completely made him a cynic.
Well, all I'm saying is that she wakes up with a start on the couch, like she was dreaming about it. This whole gun dance happens, and then she wakes up, and then they have the whole we want to hear about our past song, and then like they find out that the Nazis are going to be coming to occupy Paris quite soon, and everyone's leaving the country, and the underclassmen all sing that song about the Nazis invading Paris.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I love that song, by the way. The Nazis Are Coming song.
It's really
spooky.
It like good sense of and foreboding and I agree. That was
it has song. It really has that sense of urgency that the Nazis are coming. The Nazis are coming to Paris, and like everyone's trying to get out. What's going to happen to us? Like the scenes of all these frightened people pushing to board a train to get out of the country is really evocative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like we should talk about Nono Sumika because she was the top Musume star. And we talked about her outfits a little bit, but you know what? I thought this was really interesting because I didn't realize this until afterwards, but Ingrid Bergman, who played Elsa in Casablanca, her next film was For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's so funny.
And then... Like, I mean, it wasn't her next show, but Nono Sumika, like 2 years later,
it was 1 year later.
For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
It was 1 year later. It was literally Casablanca, then Trafalgar, then For Whom.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty funny when I learned that.
I did not even know she was in that movie. I mean, I sort of knew vaguely about the film For Whom the Bell Tolls, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, I guess apparently, like, the whole time they were filming Casablanca, she was, like, focused on getting the role in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Like, she didn't think, like, Casablanca was going to turn out to be anything.
That's
like,
so funny.
She really wanted to be in For Whom the Bell Tolls because she thought
that
was
going to
be this big classic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think both she and Bogart were kind of like, this movie.
Yeah. It was kind of... Nobody expected it to be what it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. But yeah, I thought Sumika did really well in the role, especially because this was her debut, and she was pretty young at the time that she debuted as a top star. She came over from Hanagumi with Yuhi, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think
only her second show with Sotogumi at this point.
Correct.
Yeah, and I know Sotogumi fans weren't hugely happy that these two got parachuted in, but I do think they had good chemistry together too.
They did have good chemistry together. I think I remember liking Sumika more in other shows. For this show, I didn't love her interpretation, but sorry.
No, I mean, Elsa is a hard character to like in some ways because you're kind of like, make up your mind.
Yeah, that's the thing is that, like, her big struggle is like, oh, I left you, but now I can't leave you again. It's so hard for me. Like, when there's all this other political stuff going on that, like, feels a lot more urgent than, like, you pining over two dudes. So like you said, it is kind of hard, and I feel like there's a way... There is some lines. Ilsa has some lines like, don't you understand that Victor Laszlo can do so much good for the world, and you're being selfish by keeping him a prisoner here in Casablanca. You know, she's having this big argument with Rick right before she pulls the gun on him. That's kind of Ilsa's big moment.
Yeah. I mean, and even in the original movie, the character is very, like, the men decide for her.
Right.
You know, even at the big
yeah,
ending
it
scene,
sucks.
You know,
it sucks because she's like, I can't leave you anymore, Rick. I'm going to stay here with you in Casablanca. And and then the men decide behind her back, no, we're going to make you leave Casablanca with Victor. And, you know, she's like, that's not what we talked about, Rick. And he's like, yeah, but you'll regret it if you stay here with me in Casablanca. You're right.
Well, there's a moment after she and Rick have their reunion in his apartment where, at least in the original movie, I forget if this was in the Takarazuka version, where she says, like, I can't make decisions anymore. You're going to have to make this decision for me.
Right.
It's kind of like that in the dialogue in the Zuka version, where she's like, I don't have the strength to leave you again, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, they make it very much about the hero, like Victor Laszlo's character, who's this very straight-laced hero.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, without him, you know, the resistance is going to fall, and he needs her because, you know, he needs her compassion and
Support.
encouragement or whatever.
Yeah.
So...
Behind every man,
behind
every great man is a great woman. It's like, that's
Right,
exactly
right.
what the setup is like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, speaking of Tomu, I was looking at my notes from back then, and I noted that, like, to be honest, Victor Laszlo, Freedom Fighter, is kind of like too straight-laced, you know? He's too much of a good guy, so it sort of makes him uninteresting.
Yes, and I think that happened in the movie too.
Yeah.
You know, nobody really cares about Laszlo's character.
I remember really liking, and one of the things I love about Tomu is that I find that she's very warm, and so, like, there's a scene before Ilsa goes to Rick's apartment where, I forget what exactly is said, but I just remember he's very warm, that Tomu is very warm towards Sumika, even knowing that her wife had, you know, engaged in something while they were married.
Yeah, I mean they have a literal conversation on the Ginkgo where she, like, wants to confess, and he cuts her off and says, "You must have been really sad and lonely when you thought I was dead, huh?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I was really sad and lonely too in prison.
He's a good guy.
But I don't, you know," he basically says, "I don't blame you for, like, finding someone else."
Yeah.
Yeah. Finding someone else while you thought I was dead.
I do think, like, in the movie and in the play, I do like Laszlo's character a little bit more. Like, I think it was, like, Roger Ebert, who was just like, yeah, this character, like, couldn't act. It was a terrible performance, and everybody hates him. And I was like, no,
actually,
like Laszlo.
Like I said, I haven't watched the movie in 10 years, but my notes at the time was I found Laszlo to be very charismatic, and I thought it was almost a disservice to Tomu that she didn't get to shine more. I don't know, it just didn't come off the same way. Like, she looked cool, and she got like a nice dance break in the We Are Alive
like when
song.
I think of Casablanca, I think of that dance scene where she's like up on the block and like doing that scene. Is it's very memorable.
Yeah. Good stuff.
But
we went super, like, out of order with our comments on specific people.
That's fine. That's okay. We are not in Takarazuka. We are allowed to go outside of the box.
That's
Any
right.
other musumeyaku, like, because you talked about, like, the choral, the strength of the choral, but I think, like, in general, like, musumeyaku singing in Soragumi, especially in that period, was very strong.
It was.
Is there anybody else you wanted to call out?
Yes, Nanase Ruriko, the greatest, one of the greatest voices in Rasca history, who they shamefully misused, and she retired within 3-4 years or something because
she does seem to have a good OG career, though. I feel like I hear about her.
She does, and I've maybe watched one of her Instagram lives or something, I don't remember, but she had the étoile in this show and in Trafalgar Funky Sunshine, and her voice is just incredible operatic level voice, soprano voice. And so she has just the étoile. Other bits are like the Fukukumicho at the time. Susan Asaya has like the solo, the guitar, you know, where she's playing the guitar in Rick's bar. And then there's the bazaar scene where it's Amo Tamaki and two younger musumeyaku. Well, it might have been Ruriko and Momochi Ito. I'm not sure. It might have been Ruriko.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. But it's a good show for that.
It's a good show for background and lots of crowded scenes, lots of people. Even though you couldn't see it as much on the DVD, there were a couple times where I caught people in the background doing funny things. You know, like buying things in the bazaar and watching the dancing girls when they should be watching their wives and things like that.
Yeah.
So, one thing I wanted to bring up, because I had almost forgotten about the story until you talked the background. So one of my another favorite fact I had about the show is that so they have a car come on at one
Yes.
point.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's
Yes,
what I
and
was going to talk about before, was the technical stuff.
yeah, so and apparently in order to drive the car, you actually had to
A
have a
driver's
Japanese
license.
driver's license.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
And so it's funny we're talking about this now, but I believe when the show was going on was the time of H1N1.
Yes. Oh, I
It
did want to
was.
talk about that too. Yeah.
I wanted to talk
So
about that too. I totally forgot.
yeah, so for the first 2 or 3 weeks, like a number of younger actresses were actually out because, and which is, as everyone knows, kind of rare in Takarazuka, but because they had gotten this really bad flu, and so there was a lot of running around the first few weeks trying to get people to fill in for other roles, and it was mostly the younger, smaller roles. But I remember Katja was out for like a week or so.
So Riku played Aris-chan's husband for a few days. And
wasn't Toki Irisu out too, or
yes,
somebody else big? I
yes,
feel like. Yeah.
Masako was out, Dai-chan was out, Katja was out at different points.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was tough. The H1N1 flu hit really hard in Hanagumi during the Berubara that they did. It was Berubara and Exciter. That was like in August or September. And then this show was in November. And in the first 2 weeks, there were a lot of sort of rolling announcements of so-and-so's out, so-and-so's back, someone else is out, blah, 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 blah. You know, like lots of... And so I was like, what's the DVD going to be like? What's the shinko going to be like? Because so many people kept being out. And Katja, as you said, Becca, was out, but still managed to be to do the shinko. So... there were 1 or 2 young girls who ended up not being able to be in the shinko because of the flu, but mostly they recovered in time. But yeah, it's really crazy to think about the treatment of how that happened with the H1N1 flu, and everyone was just like, oh, so-and-so's out, but it wasn't like everyone must quarantine themselves the way we're dealing with right now.
Something that I had forgotten, it started in Hyogo. That was the epicenter of H1N1 in Kobe. So, like, schools shut down for like a week in the spring when the first wave hit, but then they opened them up pretty quickly. And I think part of it was because it wasn't so fatal.
It wasn't so deadly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't as much of a lung issue. So
it was obviously contagious because a lot of people kept getting it and having to be out of the performances, but it wasn't as fatal. That must have been the difference.
Yeah. If I can, and we can edit this out later if this is too somber, but to speak a little bit about current events, a lot of the cast of the Broadway musical Moulin Rouge, I mean, not a lot, but a noticeable number of members did come down with coronavirus. Thank God no one has died of it yet. But I think the issue is, even in America, where I would like to say we have better union regulations, but then especially in Takarazuka, I think so many performers are taught to sing through their colds and to just get through it. And now I think we're living in a time in which that's really deadly.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, lucky or unlucky, you know, so many performance venues closed down that luckily they don't have to perform right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody know? Oh, I'm sorry, Julie, but does anybody know? I'm curious if anybody listening knows. Are the girls being furloughed right now? Like, I wonder if they're getting paid. You know, because I follow a lot of opera singers, and a lot of them are like getting no income right now. I know that's been a big worry.
So I don't know about Hanagumi, like the troops that are supposed to be performing right now, Hanagumi and Hoshigumi, but Soragumi's still rehearsing because I saw the rehearsal digest for Sapa and Zunchan's show. And Tsukigumi must be rehearsing because they just put out the Shinko cast, you know?
Right.
So I don't think they're furloughed.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, I know that sometimes with really young underclassmen, that when it's time to do the smaller theater show, that they just won't be cast in one and they just take lessons for a few months. But I can't remember if they get any kind of a base salary.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm very curious if anybody knows and wants to share. Please do in the comments.
One more thing I was going to say was, Becca, you briefly brought up the car being on stage, which I'm sure was just another, like, peculiarity of Koike Sensei really wanting to have a car. And they had a car on stage for 2 scenes, and it was so cool. And it must have taken so much room backstage to have this humongous-ass car back there. And
I mean, it was a miniature car, but it's still big.
It was still quite big. It took up a big part of the stage. I noted in my notes that, sometimes there are technical difficulties, and they used a lot of screens in the background to show flying planes and stuff, because you couldn't have like a model plane going across the stage. It would be silly. So the sound of a plane and a video of a plane flying away was much more effective. But apparently there was one day where the car wouldn't start. And Tomochin, the Major Strasser, is supposed to arrive in a car. So apparently she had to run on stage and just arrive for her scene. But the car screech sound was still there. And also part of the video screen didn't light up one day. So there was like a Windows error instead of a plane.
Oh no.
So I had some funny notes about mistakes, like Michan dropping her hat off the Ginkgo and things like that.
Oh no, that's funny. That's why live theater is
so
much fun.
I love live theater, and it's so sad to say I love mistakes, but I love mistakes.
Oh,
They're so fun to watch. One more thing I wanted to mention was that this was like the first time that I had seen the use of e-cigarettes on Grand Theater Takarazuka stage.
Yes.
At the time, it was such a big deal that they were like, woo, using e-cigarettes that actually blow smoke and light up and stuff. And now it's like we've seen cigarettes 100 times, and like they use them all over Batty and everything, But it was kind of the first time back then.
They were prop cigarettes.
They were
right?
prop
it's
cigarettes.
Not like we think of. It's not like an e-cigarette where they're like breathing in nicotine or.
I mean, so you can get zero nicotine vapes and things. So I think it's like like you say, a prop cigarette that blows out smoke, but it's not actually nicotine.
Yeah, and the end glowed.
And the end glows.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Because I remember, I think, Becca, we went to meet Chan's Ochakai, and she made mention of the fact that they were all using fake cigarettes, but no one in Soragumi actually smoked. And she...
Yeah, I remember you got really excited about
she was
that.
like, it was a point of pride for her to say, no one in Soragumi smokes. And,
Whoa.
Like tape, like during rehearsals, she was using like an unlit cigar, but it still smelled really bad or something.
I don't remember that part, but yeah. Because just as a sidebar, some Takarazuka actresses do smoke to make their voices deeper. And there's been, stories throughout the years of certain Takarazuka actresses who smoke a lot, but that was kind of why Michan thought it was very cool that nobody in Soragumi at the time was smoking.
Wow, I didn't think that was such a big deal anymore. I was thinking that was more of like a 80s or 90s thing.
Yeah.
You think it's still?
I don't know.
Wow.
And that was 10 years ago.
Lungs,
So maybe it is much less of a thing now than it was in the 80s and 90s.
I hope.
I hope so too.
Okay, well, we've been talking for a while, but before we go, if you'd like, should we talk about the Shinko just real quick?
Yeah.
I never saw it, so we'll leave that up to you two ladies.
Also, I feel like I should mention somewhere in here that, so going to see Casablanca was my first return trip to Japan just as a visitor to see a show, and so it holds a lot of magical memories for me, and I spent most of it on Julie's couch, so...
Yeah, this
but yes, we were both at the
podcast
Shinko.
is like getting the gang back together of that time.
Yeah.
Let's see, so...
We went to the Shinko Talk, too.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, that was so fun. And I remember they didn't allow us to do the, there wasn't, normally you would get to come up and do a handshake, but they didn't allow it, I think, because of H1N1. Anyway, but it was still really fun.
It's funny, though, because I feel like, as I said, I was rereading my notes at the time. I must have been doing handshakes with the stars at Ochakai, because I feel like I would have made mention of it if I hadn't gotten to. I did, because in my notes, we went to Kacha's Ochakai, and I was like, oh, her hands are so small and soft. So whatever the Shinko Talk rules were, we still got to shake Kacha's hand at the Ochakai.
Right. I remember they had hand sanitizer.
Yeah, that sounds right. So anyway,
so did Katja have the lead?
Yes, so
Who
the
had
shinko
leads?
was Katja's one and only shinko lead. Lots of feelings aside, she was robbed of being able to be Tani's shinko lead in the previous Raindrops on Roses because she was doing Elizabeth. She was yanked out of Soragami to do that. So this was her one and only chance to have a shinko lead. And whatever your feelings about her not being very suited to a hard, gruff, angsty guy like Rick Blaine, you know, it was her only shot. So she played Rick. And Fujisaki Eri was the Musumehaku, was her only shinko lead. I really like Eri-chan. She's Sumika's classmate. I found her to be very mature and definitely a different take on Ilza than Sumika's, but I don't remember it super well. I do remember Meat-chan's character, Hoju Ichi, Bonbon, is the best. The best. Aris-chan loved Bonbon and was like, she's the VIP of this Shinko. She's so good. And she could, you know, if your star has such good things to say about a Shinko baby, you can't help but love them. And I remember in the next Shinko as well, Bonbon also played Meat-chan's role, and I was so impressed by her.
Yeah, she was really good.
She really was a Shinko VIP, in my opinion. She was so good.
So Alice was in the Shinko too?
No, she had graduated Shinko's,
okay.
So she was in the upperclassmen seats, watching over all the babies.
Gotcha.
Nanami Hiroki was
played
in
Laszlo.
his role.
Yeah. I loved her.
And that was kind of fun because they were she and Katja are Doki.
Yeah.
So.
Tell us about the Shinko talk. Like, what is that about? What happens there? It's been a while.
I don't remember it at all. I feel so bad that I don't remember it. But they just talk about their roles. They watch a little digest of themselves and comment on.
Well, hold on. I do remember one story, and I remember they were asked because Yuhi had just started, and they were asking about does Soragami feel like a different place? And one of them, either Katja or Eri, said, no, not really. And then somehow this segged into about how Soragami really loves food and how they eat more in the Sumire cafeteria than any other troop or something like that. Do you remember this, Julie?
Well, I know stories from now as well about when Makaze entered Soragumi, and she was horrified to learn that if you don't label your food, people will steal your food. Because Soragumi loves to eat so much. Yeah, I vaguely remember something about them eating the Sumire kitchen out of House and Home.
Do they do the talk right in the theater? I'm trying
to remember. No, it's like
works.
In a separate hall. I think they must do it. I think it was a Friday. So Shinko's on a Tuesday, and they do a Shinko talk on a Friday. Does that sound right?
Yeah, no, it was a Friday because I was coming back from Tokyo at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So is it kind of like an ochakai almost? Like
yeah, it is
sort of. I mean, there's no tea and cakes, but
I mean, it's organized by Hankyu, which makes it a little
different, so it's like an official. They air it on Sky Stage. It's like a half-hour talk or something, and they just like usual. People sit in the audience and they interview them about how they did their yakuzukuri. Creating the role, their approach to it, what kind of advice they got from the stars, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember watching them when Masaki did them, but I've never actually seen one live, so I'm just kind of curious what the experience is like.
I feel bad that I can't remember it very well, but it was in fact 10 years ago.
I know, isn't it funny? Things you're like, this is going to be seared into my memory,
right?
And then you don't remember it at all anymore. I'm glad we recorded so much on LiveJournal.
It's true, me too. And actually, I have a lot of pen and paper notes that I never put onto LiveJournal, but it was very fun to read them in my spare time last night.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, Jen, I found a lot of ochakai reports of Masaki ochakais, and I went to like 5 Masaki ochakais with you, Jen. I went to so many.
I know, I dragged you guys along every time. I appreciated it.
I loved it every time.
Otsukaresama desha.
Yeah. Is that a good place to end? Good
I
having
think that's
memory.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are all doing well and keeping yourselves safe and healthy. And we will try and get some more of these out because this has been fun. And hopefully you've enjoyed it too. And if you have any Casablanca, notes or memories or things you'd like to contribute, please do. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
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 Many thanks to Michael B. and the Arcanum String Quartet for their wonderful arrangement of Sumire no Hana Sakugoro. And thank you, listeners, for enjoying our podcast.